In 1972, when La Chalupa was constructed, it was considered to be the most sophisticated habitat ever built, and many believe it retains that title today. One of the features that made that so was the PTC. We caught up with designer Ian Koblick to see what the PTC was all about.
All right, we're here with Ian Koblick, founder and designer of the habitat La Chalupa. And Ian, I think when a novice person that maybe doesn't have a lot of experience in diving looks at the habitat and they see those two white things on the top, and they may have a question. So why don't you tell us what those are and what went into the thought process in the design of those?
Well, they're called personnel transfer capsules, and that's exactly what the ultimate use was, that they were an emergency escape capsule. If something happened in the habitat, you were able to get into that, take it to the surface, and then be lifted by a helicopter and taken to the decompression chamber. But they served a number of other purposes. When we were towing the La Chalupa out to sea to make a dive, there was still a lot of last-minute preparation needed. And these PTCs bolted on top of the habitat, which had about 6 feet of freeboard, gave another 6 feet of freeboard so that we prevented water from splashing into the chambers. And the dock, we had a ladder that went down in a regular industrial aluminum ladder, and you would climb down the ladder and finish your last minute prep. In addition to that, the two chambers were capable of being taken off of the habitat, bolted together, and forming a double lock decompression chamber that was totally portable, and the air was supplied by scuba tanks. So you always had an emergency portable decompression chamber if you needed it. In many of the photographs, you'll see there's only one PTC on the habitat, and that's because it was in the training process. 3 aquanauts had to get in there. It was filled with water, and you had to very carefully open the vent valve and turn on the air valve. And if you only had 1 or 2 inches of air at the top, and you turned on the air valve before you had the vent valve open, the pressure built up rapidly, and the top hatch was actually bent, and you lost the seal. And it took about a year for that to be repaired. So you'll see many pictures of the habitat with only one PTC.
So Ian, in talking with many of the aquanauts during this process, nobody was really keen on testing out the theory of having to actually get in the PTC and ride it to the surface. And if you just look at the pictures, they're vertical on top of the habitat. When they're recovered by the helicopter, they're in a horizontal position. So why don't you take us through the process of getting in the PTC and getting it up on the surface?
If there was an emergency and you had to abandon the habitat, the aquanauts would come up on deck, the deck of the La Chalupa, and unbolt it from the habitat. They would then get in. It's already full of water. Close the hatch, open the vent, and start to blow the water down. We actually had, with a magic marker, a little line that indicated approximately how far down the water had to go. At that point, the habitat would begin to float to the surface. And when it got to the surface, it would be laying on its side, and you had to then open the vent and open the scuba tanks in order to pressurize it. But you had to be very careful not to over-pressurize it or to let it under-pressurize, because you were saturated and you had to maintain that depth of 100 feet. Once it was dewatered, the EPIRBs would have notified the Coast Guard, and hopefully the Coast Guard helicopter was there to pick you up and rush you back to our dive site where we had a decompression chamber, and the PTC was then bolted to the decompression chamber and you underwent your decompression. On my first dive, a 100-foot dive, I had a diving accident, and I had a choice of staying in the habitat and possibly dying, or getting in the PTC. I stayed in the habitat.